America shuns Nigeria. For the United States President's visits to Africa, the decision to include or exclude Nigeria from the itinerary is based on a variety of factors, including political, economic, and security concerns. Nigeria is a major oil producer and one of the largest economies in Africa, but it also faces challenges such as corruption, terrorism, and ethnic and religious tensions. These issues may influence the United States' decision to engage with Nigeria or prioritize other African nations. It is difficult to determine a specific reason for why Nigeria has been excluded from the itinerary of the presidents or vice presidents of the United States during their visits to Africa. There could be various factors that contribute to such decisions. One potential factor could be the security situation in Nigeria. The country has faced challenges with terrorism, particularly with the Boko Haram insurgency in the northern part of the country. This may have raised concerns for the safety of high-profile visits to the country, leading to decisions to exclude Nigeria from itineraries. Another possible factor could be political instability in Nigeria. The country has a history of political unrest and corruption, which may have given U.S. officials pause when considering visits. Additionally, Nigeria has had a number of controversial elections in recent years, which could also have been a consideration. Regarding Vice President Kamala Harris's recent visit to Africa, it is unclear why Nigeria was excluded from her itinerary. It could be that other countries were prioritized for similar reasons as mentioned above. Ultimately, the decision to include or exclude a country from a visit by high-level U.S. officials is likely based on a complex set of factors and considerations. The 2023 general elections in Nigeria were marred by violence, with reports of deaths and irregularities. The conduct of the elections was widely criticized both within Nigeria and internationally, and there were concerns about the credibility of the results. Regarding Nigeria's past elections, the country has a history of electoral malpractice, including rigging, voter intimidation, and violence, which has led to doubts about the credibility of the electoral process. However, Nigeria was expected to improve its electoral system in 2023 given the Electoral Bill of 2022, which was received by Nigerians as a game changer, with the use of biometric voter identification and electronic voting machines, but the outcome was overwhelmingly criticized as lacking in credibility and corrupt. Given the importance of free and fair elections to U.S. foreign policy, the outcome of the Nigerian elections may have been a consideration in deciding whether to include the country on the itinerary of the vice president's visit. If the U.S. government had concerns about the legitimacy of the election and the human rights situation in Nigeria, it may have been deemed inappropriate for the vice president to visit the country.
Said earlier.
Together, we can unleash growth and opportunity that far exceeds what either the public or private sector can achieve on its own. And the United States is committed to build these types of partnerships to increase digital inclusion on the continent. And finally, to create inclusive economic growth and to advance innovation, we must continue to support and invest in good governance and democracy.
Well, VP Harris is also set to visit Tanzania and Zambia on her trip, but it's raised questions about why Nigeria, Africa's largest economy and the most populous black nation in the world, is not on her list of countries to visit. Well, joining us now is Ambassador Humphrey Ojiako, who was Nigeria's former permanent representative to the UN office in Geneva. Thank you so much for being on the news tonight. We do appreciate your time. And that's a good place to start it. Nigeria has, one of the largest populations, in fact, the largest black populated country. Her economic and, political influence on the continent is massive. But when it comes to U.S. officials visiting, she's snubbed. Why do you think this is so?
Thank you, Adesua, for inviting me to this program. I do not think that Kamala Harris took the decision all by herself to exclude Nigeria from her African tour. You recall that previous presidents have been to Africa too, and they didn't come to Nigeria. And I also know that so many other important world leaders have visited Africa, and Nigeria wasn't part of the itinerary. Sometimes it doesn't really mean that Nigeria is being snubbed as such, but when it becomes a kind of given that these high-profile trips take place and Nigeria is excluded, if it becomes regular, then obviously Nigeria needs to introspect, look at his domestic policies that actually determine his foreign policy, and of course look at the conduct of his own foreign policy and judge by itself whether there is something it's not doing right, which makes the rest of the world not look at Nigeria the way Nigeria looks at itself as a major contender, a major player in the African continent, in the West African sub-region, and an aspiring big player in global geopolitics. We need to examine all of that and see why it is possible for a country like Nigeria, with all the potentials you have mentioned, is being excluded from international engagements at such high bilateral levels. You know, to be acknowledged as a major global player, as the Dawn of Africa's diplomacy, you have to provide leadership. And in recent years, I do not believe that Nigeria has played the leadership role that its potentials designated to play in the African continent. You can take so many examples some decades ago. I don't think that any major event or decision could take place in West Africa, especially ECOWAS West Africa, without Nigeria being on the top of things. Today, a lot of things are happening, from Mali to Burkina Faso to Guinea, Conakry to wherever. And the influence Nigeria used to wield in these places is no longer there. Take another example. ECOWAS should be Nigeria's vehicle to launch itself as a leader of bringing the sub-region to the continent. But in this decade, in the past few years, the African Union took what some consider the most, in fact, the most strategically important decision since the African Union took origins in 1963. That was the Agenda 2063, whose flagship after the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement area. Nigeria should have been at the top of all of that. Some people will say, yes, Nigeria was right there at the back, front and center during the negotiations. But after that, Nigeria was missing in action. And if you ask my personal opinion, and I know a lot of professionals share this opinion, the only way to gauge East-West relations with the African continent today is their attitude towards disposition to collaborating, cooperating with Africa to realize the success of AFTA. Nigeria wasn't there. Even Nigeria became the last country to sign. That was pretty strange. That's not leadership. Today, the continent needs Nigeria's leadership dearly, very dearly, to ensure that AFTA does not just pass us by again like a breeze, like a reed in the wind. This is the problem Africa has had. We have beautiful ideas, very strategic ideas that could take us to a level of stability and prosperity. And of course, the implementation becomes the problem.
It's important to note that the decision to exclude a country from a visit by U.S. officials is not a punitive action, but rather a reflection of the priorities and considerations of the U.S. government at that time. The exclusion of Nigeria from the vice president's itinerary should not be taken as a condemnation of the country or its people, but rather a reflection of the complex nature of international relations and diplomacy. The leaders in Nigeria should make efforts to project a better image of the country by abiding by rule of laws and punish those that have criminally corrupted the electoral process so that it can save face in the Committee of Nations. The judiciary also has a big role to play in how other nations view Nigeria. The judiciary is meant to be an impartial arbiter of justice, and it is crucial that it functions in a way that ensures that the rule of law is upheld and justice is served. To achieve this goal, it is essential that the Nigerian judiciary makes amends to rectify any shortcomings in the system and establish itself as the last hope for the common man. This means that the judiciary should work tirelessly to ensure that corruption is eliminated in all its forms, including bribery, favoritism, and nepotism. The judiciary must also ensure that justice is reflected in all matters that come before it, including electoral disputes. It is crucial that the judiciary maintains a high level of integrity and impartiality in its decisions to ensure that electoral disputes are resolved fairly and transparently. This will help to prevent the manipulation of the electoral process and ensure that the will of the people is upheld, thereby restoring confidence in the heart of people of other nations about justice in Nigeria. In addition, the judiciary should strive to create a true jurisprudence in their decisions, meaning that they should rely on legal principles and precedents to make fair and consistent judgments. This will help to ensure that the judiciary functions in a predictable and consistent manner and that citizens can have confidence in the legal system. In conclusion, the Nigerian judiciary plays a vital role in ensuring that the rule of law is upheld and that justice is served. To achieve this, it is essential that the judiciary works to eliminate corruption, ensure that justice is reflected in all matters, including electoral disputes, and establish itself as a true arbiter of justice by relying on legal principles and precedents. Only then can the judiciary be seen as the last hope for the common man in Nigeria.